Up until now in this series on freedom, we have been examining political freedom, or the kind of relationship between citizens and governments that constitutes a free society. We have said that political freedom is largely constituted by freedoms of speech, association, religion and conscience, and private property. But there is one condition more important than any other that freedom depends on: that citizens themselves, you, be virtuous and moral. Historians, statesmen, and philosophers have said for thousands of years that liberty depends on the virtue of citizens. The Roman historian Livy attributed the fall of the Republic to greed, self-indulgence, and sensual excess. Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, wrote, "It is the manners and spirit of a people which preserve a republic in vigour." Likewise, John Stuart Mill affirmed that the first element of good government is the virtue and diligence of the human beings composing the community. But why does freedom depend on the moral character of citizens? It really is quite simple. The more moral and virtuous people are, the less they need to be governed. Put another way, as individuals, the less we govern our own impulses and desires, the more we must be governed by governments, rules, bureaucrats, and laws. When citizens are focused on the good of their communities, participate in community activities, live within their means, exercise self-control and restraint regarding health and lifestyle choices, and, most importantly, are raising their children in committed marriages, then the conditions for community breakdown are much better protected against. Study after study shows that when families break down, the children's economic situation, education, mental health, and future employment prospects are greatly set back. All of this leads to a higher likelihood that children will find life more difficult and thus are more likely to experience economic struggle, rely on long-term welfare, use drugs, and even turn to crime. Sadly, this often turns into a vicious cycle as their children go through the same experience. In the UK, a 1993 study correlated a tenfold increase in reported crime in the period between 1955 and 1991 with growth of divorce, cohabitation, and births outside marriage. All of this creates huge social problems for everyone, and governments step in to try to solve problems, which results in soaring taxation as well as increased surveillance, policing, and control over education curricula. In other words, governments get bigger, and so does the potential for government to intervene in our lives. The single most important institution for strong communities and flourishing individuals is not government, it's the family. This means that we need to be watchful in two directions in order to be truly vigilant for freedom: externally and internally. Externally, we need to monitor our political leaders and the laws they are passing. Internally, we need to monitor ourselves. Do we as individuals have the virtues required to keep ourselves, our families, and our communities strong and healthy? What are these virtues? Without trying to be comprehensive and in no necessary order, we could begin with faithfulness or fidelity in the family. That is, honouring commitments made to one's spouse and children, and recognising that the act of bringing children into the world is an act of commitment to those children and their other parent. Self-control is best understood as mastering our immediate desires and subordinating them to our long-term goals. If our long-term goals are to be healthy, economically self-sufficient, and embedded in meaningful relationships, then these long-term goals must operate more powerfully over our will than immediate impulses. It may seem paradoxical, but there are two accounts of freedom that are vastly different. Freedom is the absence of external constraints, and freedom is the empowerment for self-mastery and virtue. Being free from constraints and able to gratify one's every urge is not truly freedom. It is actually a form of slavery. Self-control and self-mastery in the pursuit of long-term flourishing and virtue is a much better vision of what it is for a person to be free. Humility is knowing that we are finite and fallen, and that we cannot be all that we should be on our own. We need help. Thus, when we embed ourselves with a worldview that reminds us that we are dependent creatures, and in communities that will hold us accountable morally as individuals, as husbands, wives, and parents, then facing the challenging journey that life can be works better. True Christianity happens to facilitate this. People relying on God for salvation in the face of our profoundly serious shortcomings, given a life of purpose of doing good and doing life in a community of support. Toleration is another important virtue in societies in which people disagree widely and deeply about life's two most important questions. What is the meaning of existence, and how should we live? We tolerate one another's views not by agreeing with them, but by agreeing to disagree. By not attempting to destroy others' reputations or even civil liberties because of their differing views. No pluralistic society will remain peaceful without such toleration. Perhaps we can imagine a society with perfect liberties of speech, religion, association, and property. But if its citizens don't exercise the above virtues, government will very quickly expand to deal with all the mess. First, into our finances to fund the bureaucracies whose aim will be to solve all the social problems. Then into the education system to try to socially engineer the vice out of us. Then into many other aspects of our liberties as legislators and bureaucrats seek to use the state to bring about their own vision of society. The other freedoms can in turn be whittled away. Thus, when we reflect on freedom and tyranny, we must never forget that tyranny is not just staved off by eternal vigilance in keeping government within its proper bounds, but by scrutinizing ourselves and forming the proper habits of the heart that enable ourselves, our families, our communities, and our nations to flourish. That better vision of personal freedom as empowerment for self-mastery and virtue ends up serving the person concerned and, in turn, society at large. We hope you enjoy this series on foundational freedoms. To help you explore these more deeply, check the reading list in the description below and the recommended videos on your screen. And please subscribe to the channel, like the video, click the bell icon, and share with others who may benefit from this content.